Good morning, Energy Rogue Nation. Welcome back to another weather discussion. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I want to give you guys a quick heads up before we do start today's video. I am in the process of moving now for a second time in the last, what will be 2 months. So that being said, I will not be putting out any regular videos between now and Monday. I will, once we get to Tuesday of next week, be putting out my regular content as I do. I will be updating our Weather X Rogue Discord channel for those of you that are subscribed to Energy Rogue. But for those of you that do watch some of the free content here on YouTube, don't expect to see any videos until early next week. All this in mind, if you have any questions or comments about what we talk about today, post those down below this YouTube video, and I will be happy to answer any questions you have regarding the tropics and the temperature trends that we're going to be looking at over the next couple of weeks. This in mind, let's get into today's video. So as you're seeing here on my screen, this is the latest National Hurricane Center 7-day formation outlook. And this is something that I actually generated using a Python program called Tropical. Highly recommend for those of you Python fanatics out there taking a look at this product. It's actually pretty simple to use, even if you're not a Python coding expert, and there's some pretty cool information that you can pull from it, and even some products that I'm going to be pulling for you guys here, my Energy Rogue subscribers. So be on the lookout for those. Some really cool and useful information, especially some climatological information that you can pull from these libraries, historicals, etc. This product in particular is forecasting out over the next 7 days, derived from the National Hurricane Center. And as you can see, as of at least this morning, we now have a 50% chance of tropical development over the next 7 days. And that's not even including this secondary wave that's coming off the coast of Africa. So just so we're on the same page, the National Hurricane Center forecasts these as a probabilistic outlook for the development of convection. So this is not necessarily saying, based on the color, the severity of what could be of a tropical development, as much as it is the probability of it. All this is saying is there's a 50% chance of tropical formation within this broader highlighted area over the next several days. And that also means we could have tropical development in the next 24 to 48 hours. We could have it towards the end of this 7-day window. It's just within this 7-day period at some point, that's the probability of tropical development. So I just want to make that map kind of clear and transparent to you guys, because I know sometimes these weather products that are put out can be a little bit confusing, and I can certainly understand that. And I have to make a comment too on that. One of the things as meteorologists we're always trying to do is find ways to effectively communicate these things to a broader audience that really doesn't have a meteorology background, right? And that's the whole point. If we're coming from a scientific point of view, we have to find a way to communicate it so that way it makes sense. And I think this product is very useful, but I also know that it can be relatively confusing to the naked eye. So I just wanted to provide a little bit more context there on that product. This is something that I had shared with many of you in the Energy Rogue Discord server last night. The other product that I shared with you, and we're going to touch more on the tropics here in a moment, is this GIF that you see here. Now, I'm not able to pause it, so I don't want you to get too wrapped up in the motions that's taking place on your screen right now. However, what this is, it's an ensemble, right? So remember, ensembles are not one model. Instead, they are, we'll call it, dozens of solutions. And why we use ensembles, and I highly recommend going back into my YouTube vault and looking up my model discussion, where I dive a little bit deeper into this. But essentially why we use ensembles is it gives us more of a confidence interval on what we can expect over a certain period of time. For example, you are looking here at the European ensemble, and these red numbers that you can probably see a little bit faintly here is showing you pressure centers. So anytime you see red here on this map, that's corresponding to low pressure, and anytime you see blue numbers, that corresponds to high. So for example, if we look towards the northern part of the Atlantic, you see all these clusters of blue. What that's showing you is not just an area of high pressure, but a confidence interval on the high pressure system itself. When we have all these blue numbers showing up and they're clustering together within a point, that's telling us that we have very high confidence in that high pressure forming, as well as being positioned where it is. Contrast that to our red numbering, you're going to see a pretty similar thing, right? So all these waves that are firing off Africa over what will be the next few to several days, all those red numbers are corresponding to low pressure and areas of low pressure. And whenever you see the clustering, that's showing very high confidence in development. And so if you take that all the way out, and by the way, if you're curious about the timing on these red numbers, these low pressures, this would take us all the way into the first week of September, mostly talking about late next week when we start to see a bit of a concerning trend of tropical development to the south of the Gulf. Now, like I said, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into this discussion today, but one thing I want you to know right off the bat is that this signal that we're seeing both on the European and the GFS ensembles is very concerning. This is implying to us that the Atlantic Basin is going to continue to ramp up its activity like we've seen over the last 24 to 48 hours, and that could have implications for areas like the Gulf of Mexico. And as you're going to see here a little bit later on, our current weather pattern in the United States is going to have a bit of more of a zonal change to it that would, if verifiable, would allow for tropical development to move into the Gulf, which is something that really hasn't happened over the last couple of months. The Gulf has been relatively quiet since Hurricane Beryl's landfall. So let's head on back over to our models and tropical tidbits. Before I do, I just want to put a quick reminder for you folks that WX Rogue is live. It is a free platform for energy and ag markets in particular. Excuse me. And this is a weather product particularly geared to those two specific sectors. A lot of times you're going to go on your weather apps and you're going to see just more broad forecasts relating to temperature and dew point, wind speed, etc., which makes sense because a lot of free weather apps out there are catering more to the general audience. We just talked about general audience when it comes to weather models, and free weather apps aren't any different than that. In the case of this product, we're specifically focused in on the energy and agricultural sectors. For example, if you look towards the top left, we're forecasting for our population-weighted cooling degree days. We even go as far as sorting that by the EIA region using our GFS model available to us. And this is forecasting out how many cooling degree days can we expect over a 7 to 8 day window, and for what region, right? So for example, according to the GFS, and this is a trend that we're seeing, we're going to continue to see high pressure build out towards the west coast, which would imply more of a unchangeable cooling degree day output for the Pacific region, which we can actually customize this and focus more on the Pacific region. And for the most part, we see a bit of a jump in our cooling degree days by early next week with that building of high pressure before we do see a bit of a temporary drop. And of course, if we put on our other regions, you can see that for the most part, the Midwest and the Middle Atlantic are going to see a general downtrend in cooling degree days as we look towards a low pressure system that moves through and brings some cooler weather from the poles by early next week. You can also look at this from the heating degree day perspective, and as you can see on this current chart, and by the way, these are outputted pretty regularly, although I do notice on the HDD this starts on the 27th. But regardless, right, we have heating degree days that are forecasted as well. Mid-Atlantic, West, North Central, West, South Central, Pacific. So all these products are available to you for free. We also provide total degree days too, and this is especially for those that have interests in the energy and the energy and the ag markets. You can check it out for free, wxrogue.com, and we will be providing a premium service very soon. It's very, very soon. It's going to definitely be before the winter season. Stay tuned for that. We are actively working on it. We have some really cool products coming your way, and that would be a paid service, but this product and the products you see here on this website will remain free forever. So That all in mind, all plugs aside, let's take a look back at our current activity across the United States, and then we'll take a look at the Atlantic Basin. We'll start first here with the latest COD map. And as you can see, a little bit of a change in our pattern, if you will. We have some showers and thunderstorms moving across the lower Great Lakes this morning. And I must say, too, for the Gulf Coast, we're actually seeing more deep convection over the last couple of days, and that has to do with the pattern shift there. This has been an area that I mentioned at the very beginning of the video that has been rather quiet over the last couple of months since the landfall of Beryl. And now we're starting to see a little bit of some shower and thunderstorm activity. This is not expected to become tropical by any means. This is just hugging the coast at this point, so expect some pretty nice rainfall for the Gulf shorelines, especially by Houston and up towards New Orleans over these next couple of days, with some nice showers and thunderstorms, not moving very fast. So again, could see some flooding concerns there. Just off the coast of the Middle Atlantic, we are also seeing some showers and thunderstorms. That is now moving offshore. And this broader system, these red lines, remember, are our jet stream. And this is actually helping to bring down a low pressure system from the poles as that moves southeast. And you can thank our building high pressure for that out west, because remember, high pressure is going to help to dislodge these low pressure systems that dance around the poles above this map. And as it does so, these lows would then dive south and east and bring some cooler temperatures. And that's exactly what the models are showing. This is also something we're observing right now, as this low pressure is expected to continue to dive off towards the south and east, towards the northeast, as we head into this weekend and early next week. So as we saw on that chart earlier ago on WX Rogue, you see that this is actually plotting for that. If we look at, say, the Middle Atlantic, we see a pretty sizable drop in our cooling degree days, and that is because of that low pressure, that circumpolar low, that's going to be moving off towards the southeast and bringing some cooler temperatures for the northeast. Not expecting really high HDD values out of this, because remember, it is now the early September, so we're not going to be seeing any major freezes per se, unless if you were talking about some of our far northern reaches of Maine and even up towards Nova Scotia, New Brunswick. But again, I'm not expecting that to be a widespread thing. If anything, there's a possibility of that at very, very high elevations, but not something we're going to be seeing widespread. So no hard freezes to talk about, mostly just some cooler temperatures here. And these things can happen, especially in September. We can see some cooler temperatures. So that being said, we're going to continue to see heat build out towards the west coast subsequent to that high pressure. And that's going to be, once again, also a relatively temporary thing before we then see some cooler air move into the region, or more mild air move into the region. But still, nonetheless, we will see those above normal temperatures continue for the Four Corner states and the southwestern United States during this week to 2 week span. And that's going to be likely the areas that see some of the higher above normal temperatures. Of course, the south central United States will also see that too, but you can make the argument that the Pacific Northwest and the West Coast in general will see some of those more above normal temperatures as they sit underneath that high pressure aforementioned. Now, if we turn our attention to how we started the conversation today, and that's out towards the Atlantic Basin, what a difference 2 weeks makes. We've been talking about the quietness, not just of the Gulf, but of the Atlantic Basin over the last couple of weeks, and take a look at this change. If you go back to my videos a couple of weeks ago, you would see that the Atlantic Basin has been very quiet. We weren't even seeing any convection at one point. And a lot of that was because we were seeing a large swath of Saharan dust that was coming off the coast of Africa. Very common, by the way, for July and August, but I've noticed it being a lot more amplified in the last couple of years, which tends to shunt tropical activity. Well, that's starting to subside somewhat, which has left a corridor of less dry air, pretty moist air, and also a favorable shear environment, which is why we're seeing a large uptick in activity across the Atlantic Basin. This area in particular, highlighted in pink, is what the National Hurricane Center is particularly concerned about, as we're seeing a lot more I would say, consolidation within that corridor. You got a couple of areas of convection that are separated by these X's, and any one of these can develop into a tropical depression over the next several days. This convection that we're seeing fired off in the Atlantic Basin is in large part due to the activity being increased off the African coastline. We're seeing a decrease in that Saharan dust plume to the north, but then we're seeing an increase in open waves that are firing off the African coastline, which help to initiate additional tropical development downstream, which is exactly what we're seeing here. Now, as I showed you in the very beginning of this video, the models are picking up on this and really taking this convection towards potentially the Gulf of Mexico and or Florida. Now, this is very much subject to change. These things will change in terms of pathing, and honestly, one of the rules of thumb that I have is I don't even like to forecast pathing of storms if one truly has not formed yet. Remember, there really isn't low pressures that exist here. I mean, they do, but they're not very strong. They're not even that well defined. And the only way that we can truly forecast where a tropical system is going to land is not just with our model suite, but we need to also know what system we're talking about. It's very hard to diagnose that when you have this relatively messy wave of convection to the east of the Lesser Antilles. So I'm going to avoid doing that. But what I will say is that the models do take any one of these storms up towards the Gulf of Mexico, and the reason for that is because those same models are forecasting for more of a zonal jet pattern across the United States, which would essentially create an environment that would allow for these storms to not be steered very much. They'd only be steered by the easterlies and then get picked up towards the Gulf. That would mean that certainly the Gulf is an area we have to keep a very close eye on, as well as the broader Atlantic basin. So it's a really concerning thing for me as a forecaster, seeing these models come together and continuously paint that. And it's also very concerning that our pattern is forecasted to move more towards the zonal pattern, which, of course, has been forecasted by a lot of our climate models over the last couple of months, and that's actually starting to verify in many cases. So let's take a look at some of those models that I'm talking about here. We'll head on over to Tropical Tidbits. And for this forecast, as I started out at the very top of this video, I am going to focus on the ensemble view. I am not going to be showing you any singular solutions like the GFS, and the reason for that is because it does not make sense to go down kind of la-la land and show you potential hurricanes hitting the Gulf. That's very far out, and we don't even have a low pressure that formed yet. I think that's kind of borderline hype casting, and I don't want to do that and cause a panic. So instead, I'm going to just stick to the ensembles for what it is right now. And so I'll start first here with the GFS ensemble, and this is once again taking a look at our jet stream. Height rises and height falls, but don't get too hung up on the height rise, height fall stuff. Just focus in on these black lines which correspond to the jet stream. And as we go into what would be essentially today, right, we talked about that low pressure that's currently up towards Manitoba. Because of that high pressure that builds out west, it helps to essentially punch and dislodge one of these lows to the north and help it dive southeast. That's going to bring some cooler temperatures to the northeast and also to some degree the Midwest, but mostly the northeast as we head into early next week. We could see some of our, I would argue, some of our coolest temperatures of what will be, I believe, meteorological fall starting September 1st. So we're going to see some fall-like weather coming into places like Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Boston, Massachusetts. And then by the time we get to the middle of next week, notice how our pattern becomes a little bit more zonal, right? So this is really important. As we head towards what would be Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So here's Thursday, here's Friday. We still, if I change my region here, we still have this area of high pressure out west. So it's not truly a zonal pattern where it goes from west to east. We have a little bit of some troughing and ridging. So here's our ridge and here's our trough. That being said, this still creates a environment favorable for tropical storms, essentially. Because what's happening is you don't really have, a lot of your steering is going to be off towards the north. You're not really seeing a jet crash down. Of course, if that was to happen, that could inhibit Gulf activity and help to shear those storms off, any storm that does move into the Gulf. But the important thing to note here is that the GEFS pattern would essentially support more of a essentially quieter Gulf that's uninhibited by any processes to the north. So what that would imply is that any convection that moves into the Gulf would be less inhibited by the jet stream and more so feed off of these really hot sea surface temperatures and possibly some low shear. So that is certainly concerning. And if we were to go back to that same map we looked at before, which we can head on over to, let's do this one here. Perfect. So we'll just focus in on the Gulf, right? As we go for the middle of this week, you start to see, so here's one system that shows up just near to the north of the Yucatan Peninsula, and that moves north into what would be New Orleans. But then you see quite a few low pressure clustering out towards the Atlantic Basin. Quite a bit of activity that shows up towards the end of this run, and you really begin to see this right around what would be late next week. So a flurry of activity that shows up, and again, I know I'm showing you what could be a potential system hitting Alabama, Mississippi by next week, but I don't want you getting hung up on that in particular. The important thing to take away from this is not the location or specifics of where this hits, but the confidence of it showing up, and also the large swing in activity that takes place. This is certainly a stark contrast to what we've been used to the last couple of months. As I've been telling our folks and our Energy Rogue subscribers, you can go back to my live stream with Brian and Bill a couple weeks ago. I made very clear we cannot let our guard down about the Atlantic and the Gulf. We are in peak hurricane season. We are at the end of what will be the Saharan dust season. We are also in a transitional pattern from Enso neutral to La Nina. That, of course, has implications. We're in sort of this neutral pattern, which tends to show some relatively high favorability for tropical development. So, excuse me, this is certainly a concerning signal I'm seeing. And if we were to tie this into the climatology of the tropics, as well as other ingredients that go into forecasting the tropics, this certainly is something that is raising alarm bells in my head. But like I said, do not get hung up in the placement of these systems, all right? Because this will certainly change. We don't even have a low pressure formed yet in the Atlantic Basin. My whole point of showing the ensembles is just to give you an idea on the potential uptick in activity by next week, which the confidence continues to grow by the day. So if you have any questions between now and Tuesday, post those down in the YouTube comments below. If you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, please do so. It is free, no cost to you. Just hit that subscribe button down below so that way you can get updates on when my videos do come out. And for my Energy Rogue subscribers that constantly check that WX Rogue Discord channel in our server, if you have any questions, you want to post those there, you certainly can. And I'll be getting to those periodically over the next couple of days. My updates will only be on the Discord channel itself over at Energy Rogue. If you are interested in subscribing to the Energy Rogue platform, which provides a wide range of products for commodity traders in nat gas and energy, I will have a link down in the description below. And with that all said, I hope you all have a great rest of your weekend, and we will see you back here on Tuesday with another weather discussion. Take care.